Thank you for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. My name is Perry Dugard Owens, and our team is happy to assist TDOT today in hosting this meeting. Today, you will learn more about the multimodal recommendations in TDOT Region 2 as part of TDOT's study of needs for the entire I-40 corridor, as well as the I-81 corridor. A few items to note while we are waiting for the meeting to start. Since we are in a virtual environment, please be sure to mute your sound so that we do not have any background noise. If you have questions, please enter the question in the chat box to the right of your screen, and we will answer them in order during our Q&A segment. If you do not hear your question directly, it's because we are grouping similar questions by topic. This is the second of 4 virtual meetings that will happen in each TDOT region along the corridor, from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. Please share our virtual meeting information with your friends in other regions of the corridor. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our host for the evening, TDOT Region 2 Rep, Andrea Noel. Andrea?
Thanks, Perry, and thank you all for joining us here this evening for the second round of public meetings for our I-40, I-81 multimodal corridor study. As Perry said, my name is Andrea Noel. I serve as the Planning Supervisor for Region 2 for TDOT, and we're happy to host you here today. The purpose of the study is to identify current and future needs over the next 20 years along all of I-40 and I-81 and to develop solutions for TDOT to consider. I do want to emphasize, though, that this is a study and does not make any final decisions about which projects TDOT may move forward with. Evening's meeting is designed to provide you with an overview of the types of issues that have been studied along I-40 and I-81 and a range of suggested solutions. We'll also address questions, so please feel free to type those into the question and answer chat box. We'll be happy to answer those at the end of the meeting. Let me now introduce you to Ms. Jean Stevens. She's with WSP, and she'll be leading the discussion tonight and provide you with an overview of the study findings and potential solutions. Jean?
Great. Thanks, Andrea. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. I appreciate everybody that's attending this virtual meeting. We'll do a quick recap of the study purpose for those of you who weren't part of the round 1 public meetings, and then we'll talk a little bit about the types of needs and solutions that are being presented here for comment. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds today, but I do have a couple of team members with me who may help field questions at the end of the presentation. And as we mentioned, you're more than welcome to type your questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation, especially if you think you might forget your question otherwise. But we are going to wait till the end to start responding, since sometimes a question does end up being answered just a few slides later. So this study covers a 20-year time frame, but the recommendations will be phased so that it includes short and midterm improvements. It's a data-driven planning process to identify both current and future interstate needs with input from people who live and work along the corridor and use it for their travels, which is you. And the result of the study will be a pool of projects that decision makers can consider as funding becomes available. Now, this is by far the longest interstate corridor in Tennessee, totaling about 530 miles when you add I-40 and I-81 together. It spans the entire state, from the Arkansas state line to the Virginia state line up at Bristol and down to the North Carolina state line down in Cocke County. Totally, it passes through 28 counties and connects 8 of the state's 11 metropolitan areas. Our meeting tonight, as you heard, is focused on the portion of the corridor that's located within TDOT's Region 2, which is the section of I-40 that runs through Putnam and Cumberland counties. This slide shows the project stages in relation to public engagement. And in round 1 of our public meetings, we talked about current and future interstate conditions and got citizen input on where the needs are. At this meeting, we're going to talk about the potential solutions to those needs prior to completing the final study. We'll be taking public comment this month through an online survey, and I'll provide that link on one of our final slides tonight. So here are the different solution types that we'll be talking about for needs that are on I-40 and I-81. First would be highway expansion. That might be projects related to adding new lanes, interchange and ramp improvements, projects that involve safety both on the I-40-81 corridor itself and on the main detour routes for the interstate. something we lovingly call TSMO, which is Transportation Systems Management and Operations. That's an approach to managing the existing system more efficiently rather than adding physical capacity. Solutions involving freight, which are looking to improve more safe and efficient movement of freight and goods and support the economy. And transit options, things for people who either can't or don't want to drive, and not just locally, but within regions of the state and even across Tennessee. Now, in terms of these recommendations for the Putnam and Cumberland County section of I-40, this isn't necessarily the most heavily populated area of the corridor, but Cookeville and Crossville are both significant communities that are experiencing growth. And the interstate here isn't just being used by through traffic. There are also a lot of cars and trucks using I-40 in this area for local travel. This section's also notable for the area's rolling terrain, and rolling might be kind of understating it. In some cases, it's really rugged and absolutely just mountainous. And when we asked you for input during round one of these meetings, we heard loud and clear that slow-moving trucks are a big issue on Monterey Mountain. So I think you're going to see some proposed highway expansion and safety improvements over the next few slides that address several of these concerns that you've brought up. And I'm going to turn it over for the next few slides to Paige Harris on our team, one of the engineers that helped develop these projects, to give a brief overview of what we've identified here. Paige?
Thanks, Jean. The corridor study details several potential highway improvement projects which align with Jean's comments about growth in this area of the state along I-40. As shown and as outlined on this slide, we'll cover these recommendations from a high-level perspective. Starting on the far left in Putnam County, the yellow dot represents improving the existing interchange at exit 280, State Route 56 in Baxter, which would include widening State Route 56 under I-40 and the ramps at the interchange in order to provide operational and safety enhancements. Continuing east and to the right on the map, the green lines in Cookeville represent proposed auxiliary lanes between exit 286, Willow Avenue, and to exit 288, State Route 111. You may be asking yourself, what is an auxiliary lane? An auxiliary lane is an added lane on the interstate between interchanges, which gives drivers more time and space to safely merge on or off the interstate. The corridor study also recommends auxiliary lanes in the Crossville area between exit 317, State Route 28, and exit 322, Peavine Road, as shown by the green lines on the map. The blue dot in the middle of the map near Monterey represents an interchange improvement project at exit 301, which entails adding a deceleration lane in the westbound direction along I-40. And again, you may be asking yourself, what's a deceleration lane? A deceleration lane is a lane on the right lane of travel prior to the exit, which allows traffic exiting the interstate an appropriate space to slow down in order to exit the facility safely. And last but not least, the blue dot in the Crossville area represents ramp terminal improvements at exit 317, State Route 28, in order to remove the existing islands at the exit ramps. Jean, next slide for me. As Jean mentioned, safety enhancements are a solution type covered in the evaluation of the corridor. The safety improvements shown on this slide cover freight-related enhancements, as these specific recommendations are geared to address issues related to and as a result of heavy truck traffic. Within Region 2, there are 2 locations for proposed truck climbing lanes, as noted by the red lines shown on the map. On the westernmost side of Putnam County, near the Buffalo Valley area, one is proposed in the eastbound direction from exit 268, Buffalo Valley Road, to exit 273, State Route 56. And the other is also located in Putnam County, but near the Monterey Mountain area, in the eastbound direction from exit 290, State Route 24, to exit 300. Also in the Monterey Mountain area, it is proposed to add a runaway truck ramp in the westbound direction somewhere between exit 290 to exit 300. Similar to auxiliary lanes and deceleration lanes, you may be asking yourself, what is a runaway truck ramp? Also known as truck escape ramps, they're composed of loose gravel or sand and are hard to miss as they tend to have a steep grade in order to safely stop large trucks. Overall, they are intended to provide a safe location for out-of-control vehicles, in particular commercial motor vehicles, to slow and come to a stop away from the flow of traffic. For both the truck climbing lanes as well as the proposed runaway truck ramp, the exact locations of these improvements are dependent upon further preliminary engineering. And as noted on the map by the purple line along I-40 throughout the Region 2 area, it is proposed to provide Help Light service. Currently, TDOT provides the HELP program within the urban areas of Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville for highway incident management purposes. HELP trucks patrol the most heavily traveled freeways and assist folks with flat tires. They provide gasoline or diesel if needed and help clear congestion-causing accidents on the highway. HELP Light would be somewhat of an extension of the current program, but HELP Light trucks would not patrol continuously, but instead only be called when needed. Next slide for me, Jean. In regards to safety improvements along I-40, there are two recommendations in the Cumberland County area. The first one includes the addition of median cable barrier from exit 317, State Route 28, to exit 322, Peavine Road. Median cable barrier is a system made up of multiple steel cables and when installed in strategic locations has proven to be effective in preventing cross-median crashes. The other safety recommendation along I-40 is from exit 329 Market Street to exit 338 State Route 299 and includes safety enhancements such as rumble strips and enhanced delineation and friction along the curves. There are also safety improvements to the detour routes, which are utilized when an interstate diversion is in place. These detours are determined by TDOT and outlined in their incident management plan for each region. Starting at the far left of the map, in Putnam County, improvements to Old Baxter Road from I-40, exit 276 to State Route 56. A second safety recommendation is located along State Route 24 from I-40, exit 290 to State Route 84. And lastly, a safety improvement project along State Route 1 from Market Street to the Cumberland-Roane County line. And now I'll turn it back over to Jean, who's going to cover the remaining slides.
Okay, great, thanks. Paige, if there's any questions about those projects, please go ahead and type them in the chat box and we'll get to you after our remaining slides. Now let's talk about that TSMO thing that I talked about. This has been around for quite some time, but it's becoming more and more popular as funding resources become limited and people just want to do the smartest thing they can with resources. The idea behind transportation systems management and operations is to look at ways to maximize existing efficiency, hopefully to delay the need to actually physically expand the facility, which gets expensive and has impacts when you have to purchase right-of-way. It may or may not involve technology. It doesn't have to. The four examples I've got at the bottom of the slide are by no means the only strategies for management and operations, but there are some examples that you will probably hear about or may already experience. The first one is real-time traveler information. This is an example of something that didn't necessarily require a lot of technology. Traveler information has been around since radio stations first began providing traffic reports, and it's just gotten more sophisticated over time. You all are probably familiar with TDOT's SMARTWAY system, which can give you real-time traffic and weather conditions when you call the 511 number or look at maps on their website or maybe get it through the smartphone app. So that is one example of a TSMO strategy. Another one is integrated corridor management, or ICM. This is an approach to manage movement in a corridor by balancing use among various routes and modes that are available. And that balancing among various routes, to some extent, that's already happening. For instance, the traffic reporter may suggest an alternate route, or Waze reroutes you if you're using Waze. What ICM does is take that a step further by formalizing the cooperation among the different agencies who operate part of the system. So for example, TDOT is responsible for traffic flow on the interstates, whereas a city and county might be in charge of managing the parallel highways. And in some cases, they are already coordinating on things like special events, but ICM would make it a regular ongoing arrangement. Now, managed lanes example would include HOV lanes like you may have seen in the Nashville area. There are a lot of challenges with these, particularly enforcement. Many states are instead moving to something called an HOT lane or a hot lane. And what that does is still allow a high occupancy vehicle, people with at least two folks in the car, allows them to travel for free, but it would also allow single occupants to use the special lane for a price if there's unused space available. So managed lanes is an example, HOV or HOT, however you look at it. The fourth one I have here is ramp metering. And that's an approach that optimizes traffic in all lanes, not just one managed lane. If you've not seen it before, it's basically putting a traffic signal on the ramp. Green means you can enter the interstate as normal, and red means you've got to wait. And it sounds counterintuitive, but having people wait on the ramp will actually make their total trip take less time. Again, it sounds counterintuitive, but the data does back it up. Now, neither of these last two items is something we're necessarily recommending for this portion of the corridor, but if you travel in and out of some of the major urban areas on I-40, you may see that over the next 20 years. That is something that's being looked at for some of the larger population centers. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago traveler information, and I mentioned TDOT SMARTWAY as an example. This in the lower left corner of the slide here, you see an example that you can view on TDOT's website of the color-coded map. And based on the color that the roadway is showing up, it shows the level of traffic congestion. And this model's used whether it's TDOT SMARTWAY site, Google Maps, Waze. You know, red and orange is bad, it shows congestion, green is good. But this equipment isn't just used for that kind of traveler information. It actually collects data that lets TDOT implement all kinds of TSMO strategies like the ones we just talked about. So it's really important that the whole corridor eventually get this kind of equipment. On the large map on the slide, you can see the green indicates areas of I-40 and I-81 where TDOT already has SMARTWAY equipment. And that would include radar speed detection so that they can report to you if things have slowed down in a particular location, roadway weather sensors so that they can report flooding or icy conditions or fog, CCTV cameras, which let them zoom in on a particular area. So if the radar detectors are picking up a slowdown, they can use the cameras to kind of zoom in and say, okay, what's causing that? Is it weather related? Has there been a crash? And then finally, dynamic message signs that I'm sure you've seen as you drive across the state gives TDOT a chance to communicate messages to travelers based on the information they're collecting. So the green areas on this corridor already have SMARTWAY, and the orange areas are segments of the I-40, I-81 corridor where TDOT has active plans to expand that equipment. And I believe when we had the the round one public meetings for this region, I think a lot of folks were excited to see this orange segment that a large portion of Putnam and all of Cumberland County would be getting SMARTWAY expansion over the next few years. So what we're showing in purple on the map are a few gaps that will still remain to be filled. And the recommendation is to ultimately have SMARTWAY equipment across the whole corridor. And in some cases, it may be possible for TDOT to work with private companies to extend that fiber optic that's needed so that they can have communications between the equipment on the road and TDOT's Traffic Operations Center. Here is another example of technology that can help with traffic flow and safety. Weigh-in-motion devices and sensors are an opportunity to improve the efficiency of truck weigh stations. They can record truck axle weights and gross vehicle weights without requiring trucks to make a complete stop. So they are a much more efficient process than static weigh stations. In addition to helping with that, the technology also gives an opportunity to collect data on traffic volumes, axle spacings, what type of vehicle, vehicle classification, and the speed. And that kind of data can help TDOT with pavement and bridge design, enforcement, and planning studies related to truck size and weight. So a lot of good opportunities there. Now, if you visit Cracker Barrel, you may have seen electric vehicle charging stations like the one in this photo. Electric vehicles are becoming more popular, not just for cars, but actually for heavy trucks as well. Walmart just purchased a large fleet of electric trucks for its use. They can be really cost effective, not just because of the fuel savings, but because the engines are simpler. Fewer parts means less to maintain. And this is important for trucks because trucks are a lot cleaner than they used to be, but they still contribute most of the air pollution that's related to traffic. So if trucks are able to go electric, at least for some types of trips, that could be good for our health, in addition to conserving our non-renewable resources. Either way, regardless of whether the electric vehicle is a car or a truck, you're more likely to use one if you know that you can count on finding a charging station when you need it. Now, the Federal Highway Administration has created an alternative fuel corridors program to build a network of alternative fuel and charging stations along all of the nation's major highways. And that federal program has two classifications. You're either corridor ready or corridor pending. And you see here that the section of I-40 that's shown in that yellow-orange color is already considered corridor ready. What that means is that it meets the guidelines shown here on the slide. Fast charging stations available to the public that are spaced at least every 50 miles. Those stations aren't any further than 5 miles off the corridor. And importantly, they've got multiple connection types available. And that's important because the technology standards are still continuing to evolve. And if you think about how many phone chargers you probably have had over the last 10 years, you can appreciate exactly what that means. Now let's talk about transit. I-40 and I-81 play an important role in transit service in several different contexts across the state. On the map I'm showing here, you see areas shown in purple where there is regular fixed route bus service. So here for Region 2, you see Cookeville highlighted because it has regular transit service that's provided under contract with the Upper Cumberland Human Resources Agency. But in addition to the city-based transit that we're showing on this map, the I-40 corridor is critical to the operations for rural public transit agencies who provide daily service to citizens that are traveling in and out of larger urban areas for medical appointments and other services like that. So the rural agencies may travel in or out of Nashville or Knoxville every day. They probably use I-40 more than the city transit agencies do. This corridor is also the backbone for the privately operated intercity bus service like Greyhound that crosses the state. And it's easy to forget that it's there, but for many folks like Grandma who doesn't drive but wants to go visit the kids for Christmas, Greyhound is often the option. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, I want to point out that the transit agency operators and the riders can benefit from a lot of the same infrastructure improvements that we've presented this evening for roadways, whether it's projects to improve traffic congestion inside urban areas, whether it's truck climbing lanes to provide a place for slower vehicles in those mountainous areas, or even improvements to interchanges that have tight ramps or short ramps. Because if you think about it, the challenges related to steering a bus are pretty similar to those of driving a truck. One of the things that we heard from transit agencies in the larger cities, though, is that they think there's a good opportunity to either develop or expand regional commuter services, but only if there are convenient park and ride lots available where people can leave their vehicles during the day. Now, that may not impact some of you in Region 2, but it was clear to me when we did a project recently in Baxter, just west of Cookeville, that many people are driving pretty far into work these days. When we were doing that work in Baxter, we noticed there's a park and ride lot near the I-40 exit that Paige was talking about earlier, and it was pretty much full. So I think there's a lot of potential to provide this for folks, not just for who might be riding a regional express bus, but maybe are doing van pools, depending on where they work. So the areas shown here on the map indicate locations identified as having potential for park and ride lots in the Nashville area, the Knoxville area, and up in the Tri-Cities. Now, this concludes our formal presentation. Before I open up the Q&A period, I want to point out for this slide the other ways that you can learn more about the study and also provide input on what you've heard at this meeting. In the upper right corner here is a link to TDOT's website for this study, which has some other materials that you can review. And also here in the upper right is a link to an online survey that we welcome and encourage you to take. If you prefer to make comments separately from the survey, or if you've got other questions after this meeting, we've got information here in the lower left corner for Andrea Noel at TDOT's Region 2 office, as well as Joan Barnfield, who is TDOT's overall project manager for the study. And if you'd like to use a stamp, we've got the mailing address here as well in the lower right. So we do encourage the input. In particular, please take that survey online. Easy, all you have to do is click. So with that, let's see if we've got questions in the Q&A box. Okay. Has there been any examination of the difficulty involved in adding a truck lane, especially between Monterey and Cookeville? That is a great question. I think that is the question, and probably the reason something hasn't been done so far is because we know it's not going to be easy. But as traffic grows, the justification for doing it becomes greater and greater. Paige mentioned earlier when she was presenting this project, the proposed project, that it would be subject to further feasibility study. There was like a 7-mile stretch identified, I think, that would need to be looked at. And it isn't necessarily that the truck lane would extend for that entire distance, but that is the stretch that needs to be looked at in more detail to figure out exactly where the right placement would be. And part of that engineering would be looking at soils, the geological issues, because obviously anytime you start blasting into a mountainside, you don't know how stable necessarily it might be unless you've done the due diligence. So absolutely, that would be the next step, I think, is to have that further engineering done. I will say, as somebody that drives between Nashville and Knoxville a lot on I-40, I have noticed that since the last TDOT I-40 81 study was completed, which was about 10 years ago, I think there have been probably 3 new truck climbing locations opened up at least across the state, 2 of them either in Putnam or Cumberland County, and maybe 1 in Smith. So this is something that TDOT has put some investment into, and I think recognizes can be a less expensive way to improve operations on the interstate than trying to 3-lane everything from state line to state line. Okay, next question. How does the priority process work? Is it by region or statewide? Probably both is a good answer. Andrea mentioned at the top of this meeting that this study does not necessarily dictate what projects get funded. The purpose here is to identify statewide what is needed on the corridor and perhaps to identify what might be low-hanging fruit. But as far as how and which projects actually get selected, that goes through TDOT's existing processes. Those are great questions. I really appreciate them. I'm wondering what else might be out there in your minds based on what you've seen. Any questions on any of the safety improvements that you saw or any of the interchange improvements? Everybody's hungry. It's dinner time. We were really pleased with the level of participation from this region in round 1 and the really good input. That input was extremely helpful in developing the slides that you saw tonight. And I was actually sharing with a coworker that climbing lane on Monterey Mountain, Cookeville recently did a comprehensive plan update, and as part of that surveyed citizens, and they asked citizens about transportation needs. And what I understand is that even though that truck climbing lane is located well outside the city limits of Cookeville, that was identified as the #1 need by Cookeville citizens on that survey for transportation. So I think one thing that the coworker and I were discussing is that probably is some indication of how much traffic there is within this whole section of Region 2, maybe between Cookeville and Crossville or between Cookeville and points further east. But as was asked, what's the technical difficulty? It could be pretty significant. New question here. Is it fair to say there was not a need to expand I-40 in the Cookeville and Crossville areas to 3 lanes in each direction? Oh, you're asking some really good questions tonight. Because we did propose auxiliary lanes. You might be asking yourself, what's the difference between an auxiliary lane and a 3-lane? Let me actually, Paige, would you like to provide some answer to that?
Yeah, Jean, absolutely. Yeah, this is a great question. And sometimes the difference between just adding a lane on I-40 and an auxiliary lane between interchanges can sometimes be a little bit confusing. But for the areas of Cookeville and Crossville in particular, the weaving movement between the interstate traffic and the traffic exiting to and or entering from an interchange is really the main issues in these areas. So therefore, an auxiliary lane is really the best solution to address the interaction of traffic within an environment like this. Adding a lane on the interstate is really better suited when congestion is the issue at hand, which is not what we saw through our capacity analysis.
So is it fair to say, Paige, that the auxiliary lane is not truly a completely new through lane, but what it does is create that additional lane that just connects 2 or 3 interchanges in a row. So if you're just going a short distance, you can just stay in that auxiliary lane the whole way?
Absolutely. It gives you time and space to make the decision on if you want to exit to the next interchange or if you do want to enter traffic on the main line.
I know the city of Cookeville is also looking at ways to improve east-west connections in the city that don't necessarily require getting on I-40. There's already a really good parallel road to the north, Interstate Drive, and to the south. I think they're working on one, but for the time being, there is still a lot of use of the interstate for very short trips. So that network of alternative roads can be very helpful. Really good questions. We might, I guess, put in the chat box maybe the link to the survey so that those of you who are currently online and maybe don't have any questions could go ahead and click on that and get your comments into us. Ask somebody on my team maybe to post that link in the chat box if they could. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Emery. SurveyMonkey, as you all know, is a terrific way to get comments because it makes it so easy to tabulate and report them. We'll take comments any way we can get them, but that's definitely a really good way. Okay, we'll give just another minute or two here to see if anybody has further questions. Our next steps after this will be, these slides will be posted on TDOT's website following the meeting. So if you open up the presentation, you'll have all this contact information and survey links that I'm showing here. This meeting, you may have heard the announcement, is also being recorded. So it will be posted on YouTube, and that link will be on TDOT's website in just a couple of days. And so if you missed the first part of the meeting and you want to rewatch, or if you have a friend who didn't make the meeting and you want to suggest they watch it, that YouTube link will be a great way to do it. Okay, looks like we've got one more question before we close out here. The question, and Paige, this might be one, I don't know if you want to address it this evening or if that may be one we want to get back to. The question is, why stop the auxiliary lane at the Highway 111 exit? Why not continue it to the Highway 70 exit?
Yeah, I can take that, Jean. I think if I follow the limit, so if I don't, I apologize. But for the Cookeville area, we did have it proposed from Willow Avenue to State Route 111, which would be from exit 287 to 290. And so extending it beyond that would really, I think, transition it more into a 3-lane type of scenario, extending it beyond where we have it at State Route 111. So again, kind of looking at what the issue is at hand in that area is really the weaving movement between the interstate traffic and the interchange traffic. And for that, it just made it for the best solution to be within those 3 interchanges and not extend it all the way to Highway 70, which I think is in Monterey. Again, if I've got my limits right.
Great question. We appreciate that. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions coming in, then I would encourage you, please, to take the survey. And Perry, do you want to go ahead and close us out?
Thank you again for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. We hope that you received some valuable information about the study of the I-40 and I-81 corridors. A few reminders, this is the second of 4 virtual meetings that will happen along the corridor. We'll be hosting these from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. To provide comments and stay up to date on the final results of the study, please see the project webpage. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.